In the vast expanse of human history, few conflicts have shaped the course of civilization as profoundly as the struggle between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. This is a tale of ambition, power, and the inexorable march of political destiny. A story that would transform the Roman Republic forever. The year is 49 BCE. The Roman world stands on the precipice of unprecedented change. Two titans of the Republic, once the closest of allies, now bitter rivals, are about to plunge their world into a conflict that will redefine power, leadership, and the very nature of governance. Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus. Their names would become synonymous with military genius, political cunning, and unbridled ambition. But how did two of Rome's most celebrated generals become mortal enemies? The roots of their conflict stretch back decades, intertwined with the complex political machinery of the late Roman Republic. Caesar, a brilliant military commander and masterful political strategist, had spent years expanding Rome's territories in Gaul. His conquests were unprecedented. He had subdued fierce Celtic tribes, crossed the English Channel, and even invaded Germania, territories previously considered unconquerable. These campaigns had not just expanded Roman territory, they had made Caesar immensely popular among the common people and the legions. Pompey, 10 years Caesar's senior, was already a legendary figure. He had crushed the slave rebellion led by Spartacus, defeated pirates that threatened Roman maritime trade, and conquered vast territories in the east, including Syria and Judea. Known as Pompey the Great, he was a hero of the Republic, respected by senators and celebrated by the people. But beneath the surface of their individual achievements, a dangerous political dynamic was emerging. The Roman political system was a delicate balance of power between the Senate, the consuls, and influential generals. And that balance was about to shatter. The Senate, dominated by conservative aristocrats called the Optimates, viewed Caesar's growing popularity with increasing suspicion. Led by Pompey, who had gradually aligned himself with these conservative elements, they sought to curtail Caesar's power and influence. Caesar understood the political chess game all too well. His conquests in Gaul had not just been military achievements, but carefully orchestrated political maneuvers. He had built a loyal army, accumulated immense wealth, and cultivated a public image that threatened the traditional power structures. The critical moment approached in 50 BCE. The Senate, manipulated by Caesar's political opponents, demanded he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Such a move would strip him of his military protection and leave him vulnerable to prosecution by his enemies. Caesar knew what awaited him: prosecution, political destruction, possibly even execution. The stakes could not have been higher. His entire political career, his life's work, his very survival hung in the balance. As tensions escalated, a fundamental question emerged. Could the Roman Republic, a system designed to prevent any single individual from gaining absolute power, survive the ambitions of men like Caesar and Pompey? The die was about to be cast. A civil war that would change the world forever was about to begin. The moment of decision came on a cold January evening in 49 BCE. At the head of his loyal 13th Legion, Caesar approached the Rubicon River, a seemingly insignificant waterway that would become the most famous boundary in Roman history. This narrow stream marked the border between Gaul and Italy proper, and crossing it with an army was an act of open rebellion. Caesar understood the weight of this moment. Roman law was unambiguous. No general could bring his army into Italy. To do so was treason, punishable by death. Around him, his officers watched in tense silence. Some were eager for conflict, others apprehensive about the consequences that would follow. According to the historian Suetonius, Caesar uttered the now legendary phrase, The die is cast, in Latin, alea iacta est. With those words, he urged his horse forward, crossing the Rubicon and effectively declaring war against the Roman Senate and his former ally, Pompey. The political landscape had been building to this moment for years. Caesar's conquests in Gaul had made him wealthy, powerful, and immensely popular. His military victories had expanded Roman territory dramatically, subduing fierce Celtic tribes and even conducting expeditions to Britain, feats that seemed impossible to previous generations of Roman commanders. But popularity was a double-edged sword in Roman politics. The Senate, dominated by conservative nobles who saw Caesar as a threat, wanted to strip him of his command and political protections. They believed they could neutralize him through legal mechanisms, forcing him to return to Rome as a vulnerable private citizen. Pompey, once Caesar's close political ally, had now aligned himself with the Senate. Their relationship had slowly deteriorated, transforming from a strategic political partnership to a personal and political rivalry. Pompey, still considered Rome's greatest living general, had become the Senate's primary weapon against Caesar. The irony was profound. These two men had once been the most powerful alliance in Roman politics. They had been part of the first triumvirate, alongside the wealthy Marcus Crassus, effectively controlling Roman politics through their combined influence. Now, they would become mortal enemies, with the fate of the Republic hanging in the balance. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon was more than a military maneuver. It was a revolutionary act. He was challenging the fundamental principles of Roman governance, declaring that military power could supersede political institutions. His legions were legendary, battle-hardened veterans who had conquered Gaul and were utterly loyal to their commander. The response was immediate and panicked. Pompey and the Senate's leading members fled Rome, believing Caesar's advance was unstoppable. They retreated south, gathering their forces and preparing for what seemed an inevitable confrontation. The Senate declared Caesar an enemy of the state, stripping him of his political offices and legal protections. But Caesar was strategic. He moved quickly, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. He portrayed himself as defending the true interests of the Republic against corrupt senators. His troops were disciplined, and he ordered them to treat civilians and surrendering soldiers with remarkable clemency. Cities across Italy opened their gates to Caesar. His reputation, his political messaging, and the weakness of senatorial resistance worked in his favor. Within weeks, he had effectively conquered Italy without significant bloodshed, a testament to his political and military genius. The die was cast. The Roman Republic would never be the same again. The Mediterranean became a chessboard of military strategy as Caesar pursued Pompey across vast territories. What had begun as a political conflict was now a fight for survival, not just for the two generals, but for the very soul of Roman governance. Pompey's retreat was not a sign of cowardice, but a calculated, strategic decision. He understood that time was on his side. By withdrawing to Greece, he could gather substantial resources, recruit additional legions, and prepare for a decisive confrontation. The Senate had effectively transformed Greece into a massive military camp, with resources flowing in from Roman provinces in the east. Caesar faced extraordinary challenges. Unlike Pompey, he had limited naval capabilities. Crossing the Adriatic Sea meant risking everything on a single, potentially catastrophic military operation. Traditional Roman naval doctrine suggested such a crossing was nearly impossible during the winter months, a fact Pompey was counting on. But Caesar was not a traditional commander. In a move that would become legendary in military history, he decided to pursue Pompey with a small, elite force. Abandoning traditional caution, he crossed the Adriatic in a daring winter expedition. His ships, laden with approximately 15,000 veteran legionaries, navigated treacherous waters that most commanders would have considered impassable. The psychological warfare was as important as the military maneuvers. Caesar understood that appearance and perception could be as powerful as military might. He portrayed himself as a leader willing to take unprecedented risks, a narrative that resonated deeply with his soldiers and the broader Roman population. Pompey's strategy was defensive. He was assembling a massive army, drawing support from client kingdoms and Roman provinces in the east. His forces outnumbered Caesar's significantly. Client kings like Deiotarus of Galatia and Ariobarzanes of Cappadocia provided substantial resources, believing Pompey represented the legitimate Roman government. The diplomatic dimension of the conflict was incredibly complex. Roman provinces and client kingdoms were forced to choose sides. Some genuinely believed in preserving the republican system, while others saw an opportunity for political advancement. Opportunism and genuine political conviction intertwined in a complex political landscape. Caesar's initial movements in Greece were designed to disrupt Pompey's preparations. He conducted rapid surprise attacks that prevented Pompey from consolidating his forces. These were not just military actions, but psychological operations intended to undermine Pompey's confidence and strategic planning. The terrain became a critical factor. Greece's mountainous landscape offered natural defensive positions. Pompey sought to leverage these geographical advantages, positioning his forces to maximize their numerical superiority while minimizing Caesar's tactical flexibility. As weeks turned into months, the conflict transformed from a Roman civil war into an international confrontation. The Mediterranean's political ecosystem was being redrawn, with every major and minor power watching and calculating their potential advantages. Caesar's ability to move quickly, to adapt, and to maintain the loyalty of his troops became his greatest weapons. While Pompey assembled a massive but potentially unwieldy force, Caesar's legions remained a tight, disciplined fighting unit utterly devoted to their commander. The stage was being set for one of the most significant battles in ancient military history. Pompey and Caesar, two of Rome's greatest generals, were about to face each other in a confrontation that would determine the future of an entire civilization. The pursuit was drawing to its inevitable, explosive conclusion. On a scorching August day in 48 BCE, near the small plains of Pharsalus in northern Greece, the fate of the Roman world would be decided in a single, brutal confrontation. Caesar's smaller force would face Pompey's massive army in a battle that would become legendary, a testament to tactical genius and the unpredictability of warfare. Pompey's army was enormous by ancient standards, nearly 45,000 strong. He had assembled a force that represented the collective military might of the Roman Senate, supplemented by client kingdom troops. Greek, Syrian, and Egyptian contingents bolstered his legions. In contrast, Caesar commanded approximately 22,000 veteran legionaries, battle-hardened soldiers who had conquered Gaul and who were utterly devoted to their commander. The battlefield was carefully chosen. Pharsalus offered a relatively flat plain that would allow for traditional Roman military formations. Pompey, believing in his numerical superiority, positioned his troops with confidence. His left flank was protected by cavalry, a formidable force of nearly 7,000 mounted warriors drawn from client kingdoms and Roman allies. Caesar's strategy was audacious and unconventional. Understanding that Pompey would attempt to overwhelm his flanks with superior cavalry, he prepared an ingenious counter. He positioned a special reserve unit of 6 cohorts, approximately 3,000 of his most experienced soldiers, behind his main battle line. Their specific mission was to counter Pompey's cavalry assault. As the battle commenced, the traditional Roman infantry engagement began. Heavily armored legionaries advanced in disciplined formations, their large shields creating an almost impenetrable wall. The initial clash was brutal and chaotic. The sounds of metal striking metal, men shouting battle cries, the ground trembling under thousands of marching feet. Pompey's cavalry, as Caesar had anticipated, attempted a massive flanking maneuver. Their strategy was to sweep around Caesar's lines and attack from the rear, a tactic that had worked countless times in previous battles. But Caesar had prepared for this exact scenario. At the critical moment, Caesar's reserve cohorts did something unprecedented. Instead of maintaining their defensive position, they charged directly at the cavalry. Their tight formation, combined with their superior discipline, created a devastating counterattack. Javelin throwers within these cohorts unleashed a devastating volley that broke the cavalry's momentum. The psychological impact was immediate. Pompey's cavalry, shocked by this unexpected resistance, began to collapse. The units that had seemed invincible moments before were now in total disarray. Caesar's legionaries pressed their advantage, turning what could have been their moment of vulnerability into a decisive offensive. Pompey, watching from a commanding position, saw his carefully constructed battle plan disintegrating. The realization must have been devastating. His superior numbers, his elaborate preparations were being undone by Caesar's tactical brilliance. The battle turned into a rout. Caesar's legions, fighting with a combination of discipline and ferocity, began systematically destroying Pompey's formations. Thousands of enemy soldiers were killed or captured. The plains of Pharsalus became a killing field, marking the effective end of the Republican resistance. Pompey himself fled the battlefield, understanding that his political and military career had effectively ended. His escape was dramatic. Riding with a small contingent of loyal officers, he would eventually seek refuge in Egypt, hoping for support from the young Ptolemaic rulers. Pharsalus was more than a battle. It was a transformative moment in human history. Caesar had not just won a military engagement, he had fundamentally altered the political structure of the Roman world. The Republic, as it had existed for centuries, was dying. A new era was about to begin. The aftermath of Pharsalus was not just a military conclusion, but a profound political metamorphosis. Caesar emerged not merely as a conqueror, but as a transformative figure who would reshape the very foundations of Roman governance. In the immediate weeks following his victory, Caesar demonstrated a remarkable approach to conquest that was revolutionary for his time. Rather than executing his defeated opponents, he offered clemency. Captured senators and soldiers were often pardoned, a strategy that was both politically shrewd and psychologically devastating to his enemies. Pompey's fate, however, would be dramatically different. Fleeing to Egypt, he sought the sanctuary with the young Ptolemaic rulers, Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra VII. But the Egyptian court, sensing the shifting political winds, saw Pompey more as a liability than an asset. In a moment of cold political calculation, Ptolemy's advisors decided to eliminate Pompey as a potential future threat. On September 28, 48 BCE, Pompey was assassinated as he approached the Egyptian shoreline. The great general, who had once been Rome's most celebrated commander, was killed by those he had hoped would provide him sanctuary. His final moments were ignominious, murdered by men seeking to curry favor with the rising power of Caesar. Caesar's pursuit of Pompey's assassins led him to Alexandria, where he became embroiled in the complex internal politics of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Here, he encountered Cleopatra, beginning a relationship that would become legendary. More than a romantic alliance, their connection was a strategic political partnership that would have profound implications for both Rome and Egypt. Back in Rome, Caesar's political maneuvering was equally sophisticated. He did not declare himself an emperor in the modern sense, but systematically accumulated power through a series of political appointments and constitutional innovations. He was named dictator, initially for 10 years and then for life, a radical departure from republican traditions. His reforms were comprehensive and far-reaching. He redistributed land to veterans, reformed the Roman calendar, granted citizenship to provincials, and initiated massive public works projects. These were not just administrative changes, but a fundamental reimagining of Roman social and political structures. The Roman Senate, once the center of political power, was transformed. Caesar did not abolish the institution, but dramatically altered its composition and power. He expanded its membership, including representatives from provinces and even former enemies. This was a revolutionary concept of political representation for the ancient world. Economically, Caesar's policies were equally innovative. He introduced new monetary policies, standardized weights and measures, and created infrastructure projects that would benefit Roman commerce for generations. His vision extended far beyond military conquest. He sought to create a more integrated, more efficient state. The political transformation was so profound that it effectively ended the Roman Republic. The system of governance that had existed for nearly 5 centuries was being dismantled and rebuilt. Caesar was creating something new, a centralized state with a strong, transformative leadership model. Yet, this transformation would come at a personal cost. The very political innovations that made Caesar powerful also made him vulnerable. Those who had lost power under his new system were plotting their revenge. The seeds of his eventual assassination were being planted even as he consolidated his power. Caesar had won the civil war, but the ultimate price of his victory was yet to be determined. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar's transformative journey would reach its tragic conclusion. Assassinated by a group of senators who saw him as a threat to republican traditions, Caesar would become more powerful in death than he ever was in life. His assassination did not restore the Republic, as his killers had hoped. Instead, it accelerated the very transformation they sought to prevent. His adopted son and heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus, would complete the political revolution Caesar had begun, establishing the Roman Empire that would dominate the Western world for centuries. Caesar's legacy extended far beyond political boundaries. His military innovations, his writings, his administrative reforms would influence leaders and thinkers for millennia. The Roman calendar he reformed would become the basis of the modern Western calendar. His conquered territories would form the foundation of Roman imperial expansion. In the grand tapestry of human history, Caesar and Pompey represent more than individual figures. They symbolize the dynamic tension between established institutions and transformative leadership. Their conflict was not just a personal rivalry, but a pivotal moment in humanity's understanding of governance, power, and social change. The story of Caesar and Pompey reminds us that historical transformations are rarely clean or simple. They are messy, complex processes driven by individual ambitions, systemic pressures, and the unpredictable currents of human motivation. As the dust settled on their conflict, one thing became clear: the world would never be the same again.